Hi everyone, welcome to Northern Lands 2 and our Mobility and Modern Cities sessions. My name is Paul Connell, I'm founder of ODI Leeds, and I'd like to introduce you to Giuseppe Salazzo of DFT, Tom Forth from ODI Leeds, and Lily Dart of FutureGov.
Hi, thanks everyone. My name is Lily Dart. I am the Experience Director for FutureGov. So more broadly, I'm responsible for our client and employee experience, but I also have a background in front-end web development. So although I've been a designer for about 17 years now, about half of that I was writing code. And as a result, I also lead on some of our more technical projects.
Thank you. Giuseppe, tell us about yourself.
Hi there, I'm Giuseppe Salazzo. I head the data unit at DFT, which is a central data team trying to basically help DFT on all the work streams we're doing with data. I have a background in technology and slightly sideways as an open data activist. I used to be nicknamed the Open Data Rottweiler. I'm still trying to be a bit like that, but I'm a civil servant. Yeah, that's me.
Tom, over to you.
Hello, I'm Tom Forth. I am the head of data at the Open Data Institute Leeds. On transport specifically, I've done a lot of work on bus fares, train timetables, and cycling routes. All the fun stuff.
Well, transport's been really important to Open Data right from the start, and also for ODI Leeds. It's been, I think, one of our key things we want to work on. And although flying cars and autonomous vehicles are coming and they're going to save the world, we love buses, and that's why Tom's been working on buses and bikes. But we'd all like this is a quick discussion about how we've all been working on different aspects of the UK's transport data infrastructure and how that's going to help change things. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are happening now and in the future, and what we might think what's going to happen next. So, Giuseppe, you look after data at DFT. What's happening now and what's going to happen next? Or what do you think is going to happen next?
So that's hard to say. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and before that, we had a few things to deal with, including EU exit, for example, which is still an ongoing issue. I would say that DFT took a very interesting choice to develop a central function for data, and we've been working on a number of things that range from better policy making with data to supporting analysis, data engineering, and engagement with the external world. So as some of you might know, we were working and we're still working on transport data strategy, something we started halfway through last year. We're still working on that, but with the emergency that sort of changed our priorities, we also had to work on different things. One key element I think even the pandemic has highlighted is actually, for me personally, data discoverability. And some of the projects we've been working on are in that space, and including what we've been working with Lily.
So just data discoverability, does that mean putting it on the web? Well,
sometimes it is like that, but it's also to encourage better data sharing, better frameworks for, it's as much as I'm a big fan of open data, it's not just about open data. It's also about making people aware that data exists sometimes.
Yeah. And
that data might be, I would say, encouraged to be shared under certain conditions. I fully appreciate that sometimes, especially private entities might have commercial sensitivities in their data sharing. So it's about how do we develop our thinking around the rules, the framework, yeah, the values that we need to comply with to support finding data.
Perfect. So that leads on to you, Lily. You've been working on the project with DFT. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So we've been looking into how we can provide a national access point initially for road transport data, and then hopefully to take over all transport data in the future. And to do that, we've taken an agile and user-centered approach to the project. So we did both, in central government terms, we did both the discovery and an alpha. So the discovery was really about understanding the problem and framing it properly, doing research to understand the users of the service and what they need. And alpha was about trying those things out. So what we've learned, how can we prototype that and test that with people? And it's gone really well. I think, on top of the data discoverability bits that Giuseppe have been talking about, which absolutely is the key priority. Some of the more interesting things that we found out were really about the variety of users that we are potentially serving with this new service. And it really, when we talk about data, we often think about it in quite technical terms, but actually there's a really wide range of people, going from people who can only use a spreadsheet all the way up to people who are confident in APIs and data models. And actually for a service like this to be successful, we need to serve all of those people and help to upskill some of the people at the bottom end of the skills to move them further up to the middle. And that's partially because they're providing the data. And so if they don't have the skills to provide good quality data, then it might be visible to other data users but not usable. And it's partially because actually we make decisions with data, and making sure that people understand data sufficiently enough to make decisions is really important. And so when we move on to the next phase of the service, that will be very much about actually what are the specific pieces of support that we need to put around this to make sure the less skilled technical data users are able to do their jobs effectively.
That's fantastic. Okay, so this is all brilliant, and as you know, it's ODI leads, and sometimes we can be a little bit we have an opinion, I guess. So Tom, data is sometimes political. How do you think transport and data impacts our cities now and in the future, and how they might be run?
Yes, I think transport is one of the main features of a city. Without transport, you can't have a city, basically, because once you can't walk everywhere, which happens when your city becomes bigger than a small town, you need some form of transport other than walking to get around. I think the politics of transport is really interesting at the moment. I was watching last week, France elected all of its new mayors, and in almost every city they elected a Green Party mayor, which is the first time that's ever happened. And a lot of what they're talking about is cycling, walking, and not traveling. And I think that the biggest change we're going to have in transport data in the coming 5 years is that we are going to talk a lot more about not traveling, which I think is very exciting. One of the things that's quite interesting is that we don't actually have a lot of data on not traveling. We know when people get on a bus, and we know when people get on a train, and we know when there are queues and traffic jams and parking spaces are filled, but we don't know a huge amount about when people choose not to travel, or maybe when they choose to walk 5 minutes, or when they choose to cycle 10 minutes. So at the moment, we've got these new ideas that I think quite a lot of people agree that that's a nicer way to live, but we don't have the data to inform what we should do about it. So I think in the next 5 years, politics is going to start looking at not just fixing the current modes of transport. So in Leeds, that's making sure you can know when the bus timetable is, use something like an Oyster card or a debit card to tap onto the bus and pay and go wherever you like, get on a train and the payment still works. I think we need to sort that out in the next 2 or 3 years. But in the same time, we need to understand much more about how we can travel less or travel in the ways we want to. Walk, cycle, not travel at all if we don't want.
So that brings me into so what's going to happen next. And ODI Leeds, our experience of the pandemic has been, and you might have had the same, Giuseppe, is that we get rung up every week almost asking people saying we must have the data. And Tom just mentioned it there about not travelling. The expectation is that we have it in a plastic bag under our desk. And the data specifically required to answer the question that someone else has at that moment is available via us. So I think looking at the new normal, we've got some ideas about how you access and make the data infrastructure available, which we would talk about being radically open. So sharing your thoughts on a blog, a story blog, or sharing a technical blog, and then understanding what data can be shared and what shouldn't be shared, and what can be open. And that what's really interesting for us at the moment is the shared data piece, because everyone wants to collaborate and fix the problem, whatever the problem might be. But then when you say, okay, great, have we got some data we can share? It's, oh, I'm not sure. And could you tell us which data you specifically want at this specific moment in time to answer the question that you have? And we said, well, we don't know, because we don't know what data you've got. So how can we know if it answers the question or not? So we end up in this mad merry-go-round. But if people were a little bit more open, we might be able to find a way forward. So I'm not going to. Who would like to jump in first there about the data infrastructure that we set up next?
Well, if we can say one thing, the pandemic has made the people on both sides of this spectrum, maximum openness, maximum commercial, coalesce around. Okay, we have a problem. We need to address that problem. To address a problem, we need data, and we need curated data. We need to take care of data, because sometimes the data might be available, but might not be available in the right form. It might be not accurate enough. Or it might be just partially available, or it might be just inferred data, and we need authoritative data to take certain decisions. So 2 examples I've come across recently were about cycling lanes and pavement data. So different problems, cycling lanes, councils were basically switching their cycling lanes from, I think, advisory to mandatory, and someone told me, you should be able to measure this. And why don't you use things like OpenStreetMap to measure this? Well, it turns out that there is an infrastructure there is a feature in OpenStreetMap that you can use for that, but that's not widely populated, and there's no mechanism to get that data either from an authoritative process. So the question is, what's the best way to get that data if we need it? Similar issue around pavement data. There's been a lot of talking around pavements in London are too narrow for social distancing. Can we actually measure that? Well, it turns out that we can't quite measure it, because there is no effective measure of the width of pavement. There's a variety of sources. So UCL has been using, I think, Ordnance Survey data to try and infer the width of pavement, but at the same time, how sure can we be? And there's never been like a benchmarking of the results of that. So I think the important aspect here is understanding which problems we want to solve, try and curate the data so that we know where to tap into.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. We've got a resource like OpenStreetMap, which anyone can contribute to. And I know, because I used to work for an engineering consultancy, that there will be as-built drawings and data regarding all of that infrastructure that will be in a cupboard somewhere in someone's office. And if we'd had a clause in all of those contracts which says you must upload your as-built drawings to OpenStreetMap, we would all have that asset. And it would take no extra effort whatsoever. It would take just a move forward. And some of the other things we're talking about is funding teams to answer these questions rather than funding projects.
Yeah.
And that challenge, as soon as you get people from across the talking to each other, they say, of course, we should set up a team and the outputs get shared. But how do we do that is really, really hard, especially in the culture we have, which demands outputs and projects and procurement. But that's maybe a conversation for another day. Lily, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I think we have to think about the data infrastructure, but we also really importantly need to think about the organizations that are using the data. And I think one of the things that we've seen in our clients over this last few months, and we've been doing actually a lot of COVID response work as well with various pieces of government and local government and other public sector organizations, and everything to a degree has been coronavirus response. But I think the interesting thing is that actually you can talk about timely data and having the accurate data to make decisions with, but most organizations are not set up to be responsive enough to do anything with that in the time frame that they need to, right? And I think that's one of the bigger challenges that we need to tackle. We can get the infrastructure in place, but if it still takes 2 months to make a decision and make a change within an organization to respond to that piece, then that's the trickiest thing. And at FutureGov, we have this concept of what a 21st century organization looks like, and responsive is like the top of the list, right? If you come across a problem, how quickly can you respond to that and serve the people you need to serve or make the change you need to make? And I think the technical kind of layer of this is important, but actually, the biggest problem is going to be, can we do anything with that data? Even if we had our perfect, infrastructure there, what can we actually do with that meaningfully?
Can you work at pace?
Yeah.
Can you make decisions? And I remember standing up when we set up ODI Leads, is I would talk as I can for a long time about new institutions and how they need to be porous and move and how they develop. And that's really scary for the old institutions or the existing ones. So how do we make that a friendly change rather than a scary one?
And I think
we've got that yet.
This change point, though, about what Lily said is super important in all this. we could have all of the best data possible for our cities and our towns and our places, and then we would run up straight away with a legal barrier to making any change. If you want to remove a bus stop in this country, you need lawyers, right? Just to remove a bus stop, you need a lot of them. You need a lot of time. And some cities which have removed bus stops, all they've done is put a little plastic hood over the bus stop, because that way they don't have to go through the legal process of removing it. And it's the same with, putting in a cycle lane is a big job, and that's really painful. But just taking one parking space outside of a bar and putting 4 chairs in it is a really painful experience in this country. So if places can't do that, then there is a challenge around the data that's available. You could have as much data and you could know the answer, but if the answer is not accessible to you as a place, then you won't be able to make the change. I think there's probably something else. That's a government restraint on what we can do, and I think that probably we'll think about whether we want to change that or not. There's always a debate to be had. There's another side of the restraint which I'm quite keen to bring up and wind people up a little bit about, but there's a cultural constraint about what we can do with data as well. And I kind of hinted at it at the start. We don't know where people walk in our cities. We don't know where people cycle in our cities. Google knows. And it's shown us really well that Google knows by publishing these fantastic mobility report data over the last 3 months. So I don't think it's bad that Google knows, but I think it's embarrassing that we don't. And if we want to say that we are running a responsive city or a responsive place that looks after the interests of its people and what they're doing, most citizens would expect that when decisions were being made, they were being made on the basis of what was known to be happening. At the moment, we don't have any of that data. And I think we should start thinking, all of us, about why we've ended up in a place where only Google knows where we move. And as I say, the easy answer, the one I hear too often, is to say, well, Google shouldn't know. So you go from a stage where one person knows where everyone does and everyone's moving, to a stage where no one does. Surely the answer could be to have multiple people knowing where we are and where we move, and for us to contribute where we are and when we move in the hope of improving things. I think that's got to be something that we work on extra quickly in the next few years now.
Go on, Giuseppe. Yeah, go on.
Just very quickly, I think there are very interesting issues in there around ethics. Clearly, of course, we want to do the thing that is ethical, but also of trust. So, if we find, a situation in which people tend to trust downloading Facebook or Google apps, less controversial than having government have access to their data, clearly there is a question for us that needs to connect, the purpose for which we collect the data with the trust we instill in people. And you will remember the whole care.data debacle a few years ago, which was probably done and intended with all the good purposes in the world, but the lack of communication created the lack of trust, and the whole thing just collapsed at one point. So I think there is a bit of worry in government to repeat situations like that that were seen as a massive failure.
Yeah, and I agree. I said on a podcast recently, would you download a bin app written by Dominic Cummings? And the reason I asked the question was because 20% of people in Leeds download a bin app written by me. And I think the reason that they're willing to do that is because they know me and they know Paul and they know Amy. And if we do something wrong, they can find us and shout at us. And they probably, the only place to find Dominic Cummings is in small Durham towns, right? So it's quite hard to trust that level. So I agree. I think that the Department for Transport or the Cabinet Office doing a UK-wide national tracking app would probably not get the kind of engagement they want. But you might be able to do it at the scale of a city or a community. You might even be able to do it as an arm's length company. So in France, SNCF do have an app which understands quite a lot about French mobility. And in the Netherlands, the OV Chipkaart has quite a lot of data on mobility, and it's separate from government. So I think it probably does need to be quite a bit separate from the very centre of government.
Okay, So we're coming to the end of our session. What I'd like to finish on is some examples of some positive issues, positive things we're finding. So Lily, if you could start and say what do you think is going to happen next, and what should we do next, and some positive examples, please.
Yeah, so we've had a few really amazing examples that we've worked on in terms of coronavirus response, some of which haven't been in the transport sphere, but I think are really important to talk about. So we've helped different parts of the NHS to track where their PPE gear is, for example, which is creating a process that just didn't exist before. We have helped local councils to connect individuals up with support that the council can't offer, so charities and various other local support groups to help vulnerable individuals get there. I think the risk with all of this is that we don't carry on at pace, and what we've done is create amazing things at pace, which is unknown for the public sector for the most part. But I think there's also an amazing opportunity here where everyone is talking about data. They are talking about having the information they need to make successful decisions. And I think we've all got an opportunity there as the data community to really help reinforce that thinking and provide solutions and other opportunities where we can. So I think as individuals, we each need to look out for those opportunities and keep doing things. As organisations, though, I wouldn't start from data. My piece of advice would be to start from the question, how do we make decisions right now, and is it the right way?
Fantastic. Giuseppe.
Well, I can just repeat what Lily was saying about using data to take decisions. It actually starts from the user, and in transport we have a variety of users whose needs sometimes are incompatible in a way. The drivers, the people who use bicycles, people with accessibility issues, and to me clearly being a data person means trying to understand what are the infrastructural data sets first of all, and how do we form a view of that infrastructure so that then we can better analyze the needs of these people. So I think there's been a lot of energy recently and a lot of people now understand that requirement. As you know, I'm now working on the redevelopment of Naptown, which is a historical, actually a relic of the past, which was created for a very noble purpose, providing journey planning. And now clearly we've moved on, and we're realizing that we have location of bus stops in that data set which are not compatible with the needs of a wheelchair user, for example. So the question for us is, how do we improve that piece of infrastructure which is still used by OpenStreetMap, Google, and other providers to highlight a bus stop on a map and make sure that that location is actually suitable to users with different needs. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of chain of thought there, from getting user needs, understanding that there's multiple user needs, and linking them to that infrastructure.
That's fantastic. Tom, can I go to you?
Yeah, so in terms of looking at positive things, I think the UK has quite a strong history on data in transport, and we should take some time to appreciate how well we do in a lot of areas. So the number one area, the example that all of us use, is any of us can now go on pretty much any online mapping website and plan a walking, cycling, driving, public transport journey anywhere in the UK, and we will get the correct answer. And that's not to be taken lightly, right? That doesn't happen in most of the world. So we do have these great foundations. I think we also have, with Transport for London, we have genuinely one of the world's best city level organizations at working with data and integrating it with policy. So we have this opportunity to learn from a fantastic place that's done really good work on this, and is also quite open. So you can download almost all of TfL's data. You can understand the processes. They write short blogs that explain what they're doing. So we have that opportunity. And I think probably the third opportunity that we have is in terms of active travel. The UK is not particularly good at active travel. We drive a lot, and if we don't drive, we tend to use a train, use a bus. We do have some places, though, that are very good at active travel. So as part of this event, we're obviously talking to one of the world leaders in active travel, because we're we're working with the Netherlands on this event, but cities like Cambridge and Oxford, to a certain extent Brighton with walking as well, you would look at them and the Dutch would feel at home. And I think there's this opportunity to learn from those places. So learn from our own history, but learn from our own places on what good looks like. And there's just lots of great things to copy and start with now.
Fantastic. So just to finish off with that, I don't think we've made more progress around sharing and being open with data in the last 3 to 4 months than we have in the last 5 years of ODI Leeds being, or 6 years it has been in place, and the number of different organisations that have been in touch with us that say, okay, look, we know we need to share. The only way we're going to fix this is to share. Can you help us? And I think that's what I take out of the last 3 to 4 months, is that people have got it, and I don't think they're going to forget that. Okay, we do need to share more, and we do need to think about design, and we do need to think about how this works. But the most important thing, I think, is it's almost as if hard infrastructure has woken up to the web, and software and the way we develop, and the fact that if we share, doesn't that mean we just use the web? We don't create something new, or we don't create a new thing or pay for a portal. No, you publish it, and you could use a blog post to do that, couldn't you? Yeah, that's amazing. Well, people are starting to understand that, and the way in which software and web development is smashing into hard infrastructure, I think is a really positive thing, and people are looking for help to do that. So just to finish off, let me just say thank you to everybody. If you've got any less points, let me know. Otherwise, we'll finish off from Northern Lands too.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thanks.
Thank you.